My story begins in the late 1980s, and as of July 2015 has yet to be concluded. I was born in 1984 in Washington, D.C. My father at the time was a career Army Sergeant, first class, and my mother was a banker. I also have a sister who is 12 years older than me. Now, my story has a bit of retrospect. From my birth, my family has had multiple paranormal happenings. Some have ranged from interesting and harmless, and others not so much. From speaking with my family, nothing had ever happened before my birth. It all started with me, it seemed. From what I can remember, we lived in a large 2-story house which was fairly close to Fort Meade, where my father worked. I still remember the colour of the house, white with brown brick, a concrete staircase that led to the front door, and a 2-car garage. When you would enter the front door, straight ahead were the stairs that led to the kitchen, and to a hallway that would lead to the bedrooms. Immediately to the right of the front door was the family room, which would lead to a larger living room. From the larger living room, you could get to the backyard or the garage. I don't know how long my family had lived in the house before I was born, but this part of my story begins through my recollection and from what my sister had told me years after. The first event happened one night when my sister, then 16, was babysitting me, then age 4. She was watching the Arsenio Hall show and I was playing with my toys. We were sitting in the family room and we were home alone. I don't know what time it was, but I know it must have been fairly late. From what I can remember, my sister and I heard a noise coming from upstairs. I remember she told me to stay downstairs and continue playing, that it was probably nothing, but me being the way I am, I followed her. As we got to the top of the stairs, I remember the kitchen and the hallway were pitch black, except for a small light coming from the outside from the adjacent house. My sister continued to hear the sounds going toward the bedrooms. I remember she stood absolutely still, and I was behind her. I tried to take a peek, but she wouldn't let me. I don't know how much time passed, but according to my sister, it must have been a few seconds, about 5 to 7 seconds that we stood there looking into the hallway leading to the bedrooms. All of a sudden, we heard very hard, very fast steps running toward the bedrooms, where the door of the room at the end of the hall closed shut. But I didn't see anyone. My sister grabbed me, picked me up over her shoulder, and we ran outside. We stayed outside until my parents came home, only minutes later, according to my sister. She told my dad about what had happened, and I remember him checking the house while my mum, my sister, and I stayed outside. Sometime later, my dad came back outside to find us and tell us everything was fine. There was nothing. No windows were open or tampered with. Nothing was stolen. Everything was in its right place. I, of course, didn't know any better, and it was left at that. Sometime later, not much later after that event, we packed up and moved to San Antonio, Texas. My father was transferred to Fort Sam, Houston. Originally, my mum and dad were from Texas, so it was a blessing for them to come back to the place they always knew and loved. This second incident is from my dad's perspective. It was only him, as the rest of us were already in San Antonio. My mum used to tell my sister and I about the gremlins that lived in our house. She would say to us that the gremlins would take things like keys, shoes, paperwork, minuscule but important things, only to return them at the last possible second. It would make us laugh, and I remember my dad would say things like, "Well, I'd love to see one of those gremlins." My dad was packing up and loading up the remnants of our possessions into a truck to drive to Texas. It was getting late, and he decided to sleep so he could leave at first light. He slept in the same room my sister and I were during the first incident. Being as tired as he was, he fell asleep within minutes of lying down. At about 2 a.m, my dad woke up to the sounds of someone walking upstairs. Immediately, he woke up thinking someone had broken in, maybe thinking the house was vacant or something. He said it started off as careful footsteps, like someone was walking calmly and slowly. My dad just lay down on the floor, listening. Let me just reiterate here quickly that my dad at the time was a career soldier. Nothing scared him, and he is very capable of killing a man with his bare hands. But my dad told me that he had wished it were a man that night. As my dad continued to listen to the steps, it began to get louder and faster. After a few minutes of listening, he began to hear childlike, muddled, almost watery sounding laughter. He could feel the vibrations of the now running footsteps directly above him, in the bedrooms and the kitchen area. My dad, afraid of no man or animal, was absolutely terrified. He grabbed his blanket and his pillow and left earlier than he had planned. Looking back on it now, my dad laughs, but he doesn't deny that it scared him half to death. In San Antonio, we lived in a house very close to the international airport. Things were pretty normal in the year we lived there, but there was one single incident. It was my first real experience. I was in pre-kinder around this time, so I must have been about 5. I used to sleep in my parents' bed, though I had my own room. I felt comfortable and safe there. My parents' room was huge. It had a row of large glass windows and a glass door that led to the backyard, and they always kept the blinds open at night to let the natural moonlight come in. In the middle of the backyard was a very tall tree, so tall that no one could ever grab the branches. The bed was maybe about 10 or a little more feet from the windows. One night, I woke up randomly. It must have been pretty late because it was extremely dark, with a bluish-white hue, the way it looks at night when the moon is bright. I remember sitting up, and my parents were in a deep sleep. As I looked out the window, I saw a glowing, bluish-white figure with its arms stretched out, making a T-shape. It had long, shoulder-length hair and looked as though it was wearing pants. It had its side to me and was looking directly at the tree and didn't move. I must have watched it for a few seconds, 10 to 15 or so, without blinking. I was immediately drawn to it. It was almost beautiful in a way. I wasn't afraid of it, probably because I didn't understand what it was. I looked down at my mum and tried to wake her up, so she could see it because she was on the side closest to the window. When I looked back up toward the figure, it was now looking directly at me, and was closer to the window. I felt a hard chill run down my back. I was shaking in uncertainty. I didn't know what a ghost was back then. I don't even think I knew what a burglar was, but I did know that I didn't like the feeling I had now. The figure still had its arms pointing outward, and what I thought was hair was actually some sort of hood, veil, or hat of some kind. I just knew it wasn't hair, but the thing that really stood out was a solid, blood-red light across its chest, near where a person's heart would be. It was glowing, almost as bright as the figure. I stared at it for a few seconds before I took cover in between my parents. I didn't even try to take another look and hid under the covers until I fell asleep. I never saw anything in that house again, and my family never experienced anything at all. About a year later, I was going to start kindergarten at a new school. My parents sold the house, and we moved into another house which was a few miles from the first house we lived in. It was a pretty house, big enough for a family of 4. It had a huge backyard with a tiny chain-link fence. Directly behind the backyard was a forest with very tall trees, and when it would rain, a creek in the forest would swell and flow. It sat in the middle of a cul-de-sac, and our neighbours were great. At first glance, it was beautiful, but the reality was far more terrifying. Let me add a note here. Speaking with my family, the entire cul-de-sac seemed off. Firstly, down the street, about a mile from our house, was a small ballpark that had a thick forest area behind it. My sister told me that her friends and her found old grave markers in that said forest. I don't know if it was true or not, but San Antonio is a fairly old city, and a lot of grave sites are scattered across the city, with many unincorporated. Also, people seem to move in and move out frequently from the area. It just seems like a rather creepy area. Now, as for the house, little things would happen first. Things would go missing, similar to the house in Maryland. I remember my mum talking about the gremlins again, how they followed us. It was like this for the first year, nothing major to speak of. But as time went on, things got very heavy. My sister, who from the first week we lived in the house was very vocal on something being wrong with the house, had it worst. One night, my mum, my sister and I were watching television. It must have been fairly early because I was still awake. My sister, the stereotypical teenager with the phone glued to her ear, was in the kitchen. I was playing with my toys on the carpet and my mum was on the couch behind me. The house was quiet and dark. We only had a small lamp on in the living room, and my sister was standing in the pitch darkness in the kitchen. My dad was either on his way home from work or was staying at the base, which he did sometimes. The way the house was set up from the front door, you would enter the living room. To the right was an opening to the hallway, which if you continued on, straight ahead, would be my room. Down the hall to the left was my sister's room, and down the hall to the right was my parents' room. Directly ahead of the living room, across the front door, was the kitchen. In the kitchen was a solid glass sliding door and a wooden door to the left of the kitchen to slide to the garage. My sister was standing next to the bar where the phone was connected to the jack on the wall, right next to the sliding glass door. From what I remember, my sister screamed at the top of her lungs. She saw the silhouette of a man on the other side of the glass being illuminated by the moonlight. She said that once she screamed, the man just continued to look, but she could see no features on his face, only the silhouette. She ran to my mum, who already scooped her into her arms. My mum immediately turned off the TV and the light in the living room. It was darker than black at that moment. My mum and sister both continued to look at the man, who, according to both of them, never moved a muscle. I don't recall seeing anything, but I do remember my mum pressing me against her chest, holding onto me very tight. Our neighbours to our left, if you were looking toward the street, immediately came running when they heard my sister scream. They knew her from school and were outside when it happened. One guy came over to the front door to see what was wrong, while the other two jumped the fence into the backyard. I don't remember this part much, so I had asked my mum what happened. According to her, she ran to the door to hear my sister's friend banging on it, asking if everything was all right. She opened it, and the guy right away grabbed me and my mum and brought us outside when my sister ran behind. By that time, the silhouette was gone. My mum called the police, and within minutes they were at our home. They took a statement and investigated what they could, but of course, they found nothing. They said it must have been a burglar. My mum and sister both told me some years later that the two guys that ran into the backyard didn't see a single thing. Mind you, this was within a second of them jumping over the fence and immediately being in view of the backyard, and my mum and sister were both staring at the silhouette while they jumped over. They broke sight with the figure when the door was being smacked on. They broke sight with the figure when the door was being knocked on. So if this was a burglar, there's a few problems. First, the burglar would have had to run about 1/8 of a mile in the dark of night and jump over the fence in under a second for no one to see him. Second, it was still early enough in the night for people to be awake, and the burglar would have seen people in the house and heard my sister's friend in the adjacent yard. It would have been close to impossible to rob us without being noticed or heard. Who knows? To this day, neither my mum or sister believe it to have been a robber. Now, sometime later, I was very sick with the flu. I didn't go to school for a while. I had a fever and just felt overall horrible. My doctor said I shouldn't do anything but rest. It was difficult, but I tried. I was in first grade then, and being a sick first grader is never fun, especially if you're told you can't play. I hated it. I slept in my parents' room in their bed during this time, and one night I had something really strange happen to me. Something that no one else witnessed that night. It was only for me, I guess. This was another night that my dad was at the base. I remember being very warm and I couldn't sleep. I was tossing and turning and crying because of the pain of the flu caused to my arms and my legs. I don't know what time it was, but it was late because my mum was already in a deep sleep. In my parents' room, there were 2 windows. One window faced our neighbours to the left and the other faced the street. I remember looking toward my mum. I was sleeping on the left side of the bed, closer to the window on the left, and saw a shadow being cast on the bed, coming from the window, the one facing our neighbours. I can describe this shadow perfectly, because even though this was over 20 years ago, I still remember it vividly. What I saw was a man, and he was wearing what to me was exactly what Dick Tracy would wear, a cowboy-styled hat and a coat with the collar popped up. But the strangest thing was, when I would turn to look at him, he would move backward out of sight. Only when I would turn around again, he would move up, and I could see his shadow again. He would even move forward to the other side of the window if he was too far to the right. It was the damnedest thing. I wasn't afraid, but I wanted my mum to see it. I woke her up and told her, and she immediately woke up frightened and investigated. She looked outside, and she looked inside, and there was nothing. She told me it was just my imagination. I wish my dad had been home. He would have believed me. It only happened that night, and never again. No one ever saw him. I never saw him directly, only his shadow. He seemed to taunt me that entire night, moving across the window, pacing back and forth, stopping in the middle and moving back and forth again, over and over. I must have looked to that window over 100 or more times, trying to catch him with clear and precise vision, but I never did. Eventually, I fell asleep. For years, I would tell people about this, and no one knew what to say when I told them. The answers ranged from a ghost to me being so sick I was hallucinating. Sometime later, when I was in my 20s, I remembered the incident out of the blue and Googled it, just out of curiosity. I typed, "black shadow with a hat." I was curious to see what I would get, and what returned really made the hair on my entire body stand on end. It returned something that had been colloquially named the Hatman. It returned dozens of similar stories, people seeing this figure wandering in and out of vision, but never allowing itself to be seen directly. But more frighteningly, it returned pictures, drawings people had made, and I never felt my chest tighten so much I couldn't even swallow. I had no idea others had similar or dead-on accurate events to mine. But why come to me? Was it because I was ill? Was it because I was young? I did as much research as I could, but it raised more questions than answers. It was amazing that people had written entire websites and documentation about this thing. According to others that had this happen to them, the Hatman was malevolent. Things ranging from family disturbances, aggression, and premonitions of something about to happen could summon him. Nothing like that had been going on for me. We were a happy family, though we lived in a haunted house, and we were good. We were a happy family. Not once did I feel anything malevolent or sinister from it. Just a matter of fact that he or it was there. I called my parents once I had read what I could to tell them. I linked them the information I had found, and my mum said something that really made me remember something I had tried to forget. She reiterated that the Hatman could be a sort of premonition. She then said, "I wonder if he was there for Michelle." Now, this next part is pretty saddening. It was a horrible time for all of us. My neighbours to the right, if you were looking toward the street, were awesome people. The father was a Vietnam vet like my dad, a Marine. They got along great. He was an amazing person. He bought me Final Fantasy, and of course, I loved the guy. His wife was equally awesome too. She was from Sweden. She was beautiful. But their daughter, she was an angel. Gorgeous, kind, amazing. But something horrible happened one night. Something that still brings tears to my eyes. The daughter, she was about my sister's age, if not a little older. She had been dating a guy that was abusive. One night, during a date, he brutally murdered her in the woods in the outskirts of San Antonio. I was too young to go to the funeral, and I still didn't understand death then. All I knew was that she could never be able to come over and say hello to me again. I'm 30 years old now, but I still miss her. I'm tearing up just thinking about this. Evil truly never sleeps. He apparently destroyed her beautiful face so badly that makeup couldn't even cover the bruises. Sometime after she had been laid to rest, my mum was cleaning our house, specifically her and my dad's bedroom. She was cleaning under the bed when she saw a pair of legs. She immediately thought it was my sister, but something told her it wasn't. My mum stood up slowly and saw her standing there. Our neighbour, Michelle. She came to say goodbye to my mum. I remember coming inside from playing, and my mum was crying. She said that Michelle was here, and she went to rest. To this day, I wish I had been in the house, so I could have seen her one last time. My mum doesn't like to talk about it much. She loved Michelle. We all did, but my mum found comfort in knowing Michelle was at peace. This was the only event in that house that had any benevolence, but this was the exception, certainly not the rule. As time went on in the house, even more things happened. More things went missing, constant bumps and thumps in the night, shadows darting across the house. My sister once was asleep when she said that she felt the pressure of someone sitting or lying on top of her, not allowing her to move. Other times, she said she felt eyes on her whenever she entered her bedroom. I knew better than to go into her room. I had my own experiences there. I never told this to anyone because it was my first real encounter with something that I knew wanted to hurt me. It's not something you forget, but it's something you try to. I remember running around the house. My sister was out somewhere, and my dad was fixing something in the garage. My mum was working, and it must have been summer since I wasn't at school. I went into the house from the garage to find my most prized toy, Jonathan, the duck that was given to me as my first toy upon birth by the doctor that delivered me. I took him everywhere. He was my charm, my luck, he was my protection. The hallway from the kitchen was in an L shape. From the kitchen you head into the hallway, and to the left is the bathroom. Straight ahead is my sister's room, and when you turn at the L, my room is on the left, a few feet ahead. My sister's door was closed, and I ran to my room to get Jonathan. I had Jonathan in my hand when I ran back down the L toward the garage, but my sister's door was open. I had this strong sensation to look behind me, and I saw something that scared the shit out of me. I saw a dark, black silhouette of a tall man. No features, no clothing to speak of, just all black. The face was almost a blur. I couldn't tell of any facial features. I knew there was a face, but that was about it. The only other thing was the mouth. It looked as though it was open because the area where the mouth would be was darker than the rest of the face. He was holding onto the door handle from inside the room. He looked at me and cocked his head to the right slowly, like it was interested in me or was sizing me up. I remember I grabbed Jonathan, put him in front of me to keep me from this thing. With that, the man raised his head upright and slowly closed the door. I ran to my dad and stood by him the rest of the day. By this time, I knew full well what a ghost was. I was already in second grade, and ghosts were now a part of everyday life for me. Fast forward a few months before we're fixing to move to another city. My dad had been hired by the US Customs Service, and we would be leaving by the time third grade would start for me. During this transition, my uncle came to visit. He was a loving man to his family and friends, and a terrifying man to his enemies. Tall, dark-skinned, long black hair. Tall, dark-skinned, long black hair. He was my Uncle Sergio, my mum's brother. Once he came to the house, it felt calm. I remember my sister even told me this. His presence there in the house made it livable. He stayed with us about a month. A day before he was about to leave to Illinois, he came up to me and said that he knew of what was going on in the house, and to not be afraid. He said he could see the same things my sister and I could. He said to me,
"Sam, these things are everywhere. They're part of our life. You just need to know how to deal with them. Don't be afraid of them."
My uncle sadly died in 2005. Alcoholism claimed him. Because of that, I don't drink often. But he was right. We left that house in 1994. I was 9 years old, about to enter third grade. It was relieving to finally leave that house. My sister and I still talk about those times. My mum had some other experiences, mostly harmless. My dad never had any. I could probably write a book on what happened in that house, but those were by far the worst. So, 13 years later, I've had few paranormal experiences. Nothing major, nothing in my home, but I've begun hunting them, visiting areas that people say are haunted. I catch what I can on audio, video, camera stills, nothing to write home about. Eventually, I stopped because college and life is more interesting. I moved to Dallas sometime after graduating high school. I met a girl from some friends in college, and soon we began dating. We're polar opposites, but we love that about each other. One day, she says she wants to bring me to her parents' house to see her old stomping ground. As we pull up, I get a familiar feeling. Something I haven't felt in a long time. The hard chill down my back. I feel that something is watching me. We haven't even gotten out of the car yet. I kept it to myself, trying to dismiss it, but experience kicks in. Something isn't right about this place. We get inside, and she gives me the tour. It's a pretty house, big, 2 stories. Past the front door are the stairs that lead up. Adjacent to the stairs is a long hallway that leads to the kitchen. To the right of the hallway still, next to the stairs, is the living room. Upstairs are the bedrooms and bathroom, immediately to the right. We walk up and I'm on edge. I'm looking for something. It's here, and it will show itself by the night's end. I'm hypervigilant, and she notices this. I tell her I'm just amazed that she looks so good in her little skirt, trying to calm my nerves. She leads me to her old bedroom, now a study. This is where I feel it most. Something doesn't want me in this house, let alone in this room. I play it cool, but still looking for something. Movement, a sound, something out of the corner of my eye. I know what to look for, but nothing's happening. We end up going back downstairs to the living room, where she says she's going to grab some beers and we can watch TV until her parents get back from wherever they were. I sit on the couch and, still in my vigilant state, I begin scanning around. Still nothing though. She comes back and sits next to me and puts her legs on my lap. Naturally, I begin to caress her legs and try to calm down, but it doesn't help. My hands begin to get sweaty and she notices this.
Sam, your hands are sweaty and shaking. Are you okay?
I nodded and said,
Yeah, I'm good.
As we begin watching TV and drinking a little, I continue to caress her legs until I see it. Something is reflecting on the mirror in the living room from the angle. Whatever it is, it's where the front door is by the stairs. I knew it wasn't a person, as we would have noticed someone coming down the stairs or opening the door. The hallway is dark, but this figure is darker.
Morgan, what time are your parents coming home?
I asked her as calmly as I could. She didn't know, but she said soon.
So, no one is here, right?
I asked.
No, it's just us.
I kept my focus on it as I continued to speak to her, and finally, after about a minute or two, I let it drop.
Morgan, how long have you known this house was haunted?
Immediately, I felt her legs get cold and covered in goosebumps.
Sam, what are you talking about?
She said in a very low and fearful voice. I moved her legs off of my lap and slowly stood up, still looking toward the door, which I couldn't see because of the short doorway wall. I slowly creep over and see the shadow looking back toward me. We lock a gaze. The eyes are dark, maybe not even eyes. It looks like a person. It has depth and mass, but it's not moving, like a doll or mannequin. Hands at its sides, no facial features. To try to describe it, imagine one of those stereotypical crash test dummies, but without a nose or mouth. My heart is beating, pounding out of my chest. I'm not as afraid as I thought I would be. I have more of this feeling of leave us alone or do something about it. She then comes up behind me and in an extremely frightened tone asks me what I'm looking at. She can't see it, but it's right in front of us. I feel her tug at my hand. I try not to lose focus on it, but Morgan pulls me back and I break my gaze. I look at her for a split second and turn back, but it's gone. She's fully creeped out now, and instead of waiting for her parents, we leave. She tries to calm down and sends them a text saying we're going to go somewhere and meet them when they come back. We don't. Instead, we go back to my apartment and she tells me everything. She said that at a young age she would see shadows all over the house, and that since her parents were fairly religious, would hang pictures of Jesus and crosses everywhere. Eventually it died down, but never really stopped. She was frightened to death about it, but nothing ever hurt her or made itself known to her. But why to me then? She said that sometimes when visitors would come over, they would see things too, but that nothing had happened in a long time. She said her parents were oblivious to it and never cared to hear it. The thing that still gets to me is, why me? Why did I see it and not her? Fast forward to 2011. Morgan and I had long broken up, and I met another woman. We got married and had a son. My wife and I were separated, and it was New Year's. I had my son with me. He was only barely 2. So my mum, dad, my son, and I head to Kyle, Texas, where my sister and her husband and my niece live. My niece, who is 7 years younger than me, is like my little sister. We're really close, and we grew up pretty much together. Also, my niece's friend is there visiting as well. It's a full house. My sister had always told me that strange things would happen in this house. Creaking doors, voices, things of that nature. Nothing threatening. My sister, having grown up with what we had, also developed a hypervigilant personality with these types of things. The layout of the house from the front door is a main hallway, and to the right of the main hallway is a smaller hallway with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The closest room is my niece's room, and the further one is the guest bedroom. My sister always said that the room seemed off, but she could never get anything to happen. She said it became ever more unwelcoming after her and my brother-in-law had started renovating it. This was also the room my son and I would sleep in that night. We had a pretty uneventful night. Fireworks and dinner were great, but nothing out of the ordinary. Ghosts weren't even a topic or even considered. My son was ready for bed early, and being as little as he was, I didn't want to leave him alone. Also, I just had awful feelings about that room too, just from listening to what my sister had said over the years. Even though nothing had actually happened, the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence. So, I put my son to bed and got him a bottle of chocolate milk to help him sleep. As I was covering him with the blanket and cuddling him so he could sleep, he stops drinking his bottle and covers his little face with his blanket. I look at him with confusion and say,
"Hey buddy, what's the matter?"
As I begin patting his tummy and rubbing my hand over his little head to get him to keep drinking his bottle, I try to pull the blanket off his face, and he puts it right back over his face. He utters 2 words to me, and in a way that I understand completely by the time he finishes.
"Daddy, scary,"
as he points toward the window. At this point, I put the blanket over his little face and pull my phone out of my pocket. Something is here, and my son saw it. At this point, I'm not afraid, I'm not confused. No, I'm livid. They used to come to me when I was little, but I won't let them come to my little boy. I began taking pictures, and in the pictures I would see white orbs. I immediately pick up my son and get him to my parents. I tell them what happened, and they know what to do. From the years we've experienced these things, for the past 2.5 decades, they don't argue, they don't dismiss, they know. I tell my niece and sister what happened, and we all begin snapping photos, recording sound and video. Of the probably dozens of pictures we took, 4 have these anomalies in them. One of them even looks like whatever it is trying to push us back. Needless to say, my son and I didn't sleep in the room, and I kept him close to me the rest of the night. He's 5 now, and has no recollection of it ever happening. It's probably for the best. Since then, we haven't had anything happen to us. Not in my home, not anywhere. Not yet at least, and I hope it remains that way. Now, as for me, I'm not a psychic, I'm not sensitive, at least I don't think I am, but I know ghosts and spirits, whatever they are, they're real. Some are benevolent and just want to be noticed. Some just want to say their goodbyes and rest in peace. But some just want to hurt us and dominate us. They want us to fear them and look over our shoulders. All I can say at the end of the day is this: there are things out there we cannot, may not, or will not ever understand. So after you check your doors and windows, your closets, attics, basements, and under your beds for the scary stalkers and sick lunatics that want to cause you harm, just know there are other things that hide in the dark. These are the pictures of the incident with my son in the order they were taken. These were taken by me. This last picture was taken by my niece. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all to hear. And for the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And be sure to keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also guys, please do me a little favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. And also remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please also change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. It would be awesome if you could like, share, comment and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for updates throughout the week. Thanks again for tuning in guys, and as always, I'll see you mates in the next one.